Hi everybody, it's Jenn from McCreath. It is July 31st, 2025. A week ago now, we lost, well, one of the men on the t-shirt behind me. Specifically, Ted Dibiase, known as Hulk Hogan worldwide. It's taken me a week just to try to figure out what I want to say. When I first heard the news, I was kind of shocked because, as were a lot of people, I don't think people realized that this guy was as sick as he had supposedly been. There were some rumors, but wrestling and rumors, my goodness. But when the facts were out that he was in fact deceased, first thing I did was look to see what other wrestlers in the business had to say. It seems everyone starts their video with a caveat. Hulk Hogan was a great character, but Ted Dibiase had a complicated legacy. For the most part, at least the people I've looked to hear from, want to talk about the business. Not what he did in his personal life, but what he did as a professional wrestler, as well as, I guess we'll call him an actor. So, with a million people making videos, who the hell am I? I'm just a fan. But I think I can bring some unique stories to the table here, given my fandom. So I'm specifically going to do a series of videos about the 10 times I got to see Hulk Hogan wrestle live in person. Amazingly enough, all 10 were in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. 6 times at Maple Leaf Gardens, twice at the Sky Dome, which of course were the 2 WrestleManias. Unbelievable that I was able to go to both of those. And of course later on, the Air Canada Centre. 10 times live in person over a span of 14 and a half years. So today we're going to focus on the first one. This was November 22nd, 1987. World Wrestling Federation live at Maple Leaf Gardens. Maple Leaf Wrestling was its own territory for many years. The Tunney family, some of you may remember Jack Tunney, was actually a real-life nephew of Frank Tunney, who ran the Toronto promotion for years. And they would promote shows at Maple Leaf Gardens that were independent. You never know who was going to be on the card till they made the announcement, but they had a mixture. They had NWA, they have AWA, some WWF, and even some Canadian indies. I believe it was 84 or 85 that Vince McMahon Jr. wanted to make a move, and he wanted to put Maple Leaf Wrestling essentially out of business, and he wanted a monopoly on Maple Leaf Gardens because at the time that's where wrestling happened in Toronto. There was an exhibition stadium, an outdoor baseball/football stadium that did hold cards periodically, but Maple Leaf Gardens was the place to be. And the deal was made, so there'd be no more NWA, there'd be no more AWA. Maple Leaf Wrestling would retain its name, but it would essentially became a WWF-run organization. Of course, Jack Tunney and Billy Red Lions would still stick around and work and promote those Maple Leaf Gardens shows. So I first got introduced to wrestling in late '85. My younger brother had a homeroom teacher that introduced her class to wrestling. Yes, it was a female teacher. Like, this is amazing. And this thing, of course, had just taken off. We had just had the WrestleMania. Vince had gone national. Cable TV was exploding. And there were merchandise. There were Hulk Hogan dolls. There were cartoons. So, amazingly, I'm trying to remember if that was a grade 2 or grade 3 teacher that introduced her class to wrestling. And so I came home. My brother started watching this stuff and sat me down and said, "Take a look at this. This stuff's pretty weird." And the first match I remember watching was a squash match, of course. Back in those days, the TV product was Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, 1-hour shows with squash matches designed to promote the stars and to try to convince you to buy tickets to go see the stars fight each other next time they came to town. So I watched George the Animal Steele squash some jobber, and it was very bizarre. Not what you'd call a textbook classic 5-star Meltzer wrestling match, but it was enough for me to stay there and watch the rest of the show, and tuned in every week thereafter. So finally, when we got to be a little older, we got to go to the Gardens. 87 was my first show, October 87. This was not an A show, it's a B show. But we had such a good time at that show that we wanted to go again. Our parents were split. Of course, Mom took us to some shows. Dad, when he came to town, he'd take us to shows. So the second house show I ever went to was the first time I saw Hulk Hogan. It was a show. November 22nd was literally less than a week before Survivor Series. Yes, the very first Survivor Series. Hogan and Andre were engaged in this feud. They were worried about, well, we think Hogan actually got pinned at WrestleMania and the referee only counted 2, and then the match carried on, Hogan won. So there's always this talk about what if they had a rematch. So Survivor Series was going to be a tag team event where Hogan and Andre might get a chance to lay hands on each other. But at the same time, Ted Dibiase had just joined the World Wrestling Federation, having left Mid-South, ironically returning to a promotion he once wrestled for. If you go searching in Google, you're going to find Hulk Hogan. And Madison Square Garden debut was against Ted Dibiase, I believe in 1979. So these guys actually had worked together, but the storyline, this Ted Dibiase guy comes in, he's a millionaire, he's flashing money around, he's trying to humiliate people, and he says he's going to buy the title, so he doesn't actually have to wrestle Hogan. So Hogan comes out and says, no, I'm not selling out, brother. You want this title, you're going to have to come and try and get it. So we get the house show loop, Hogan versus DiBiase in every major town in North America. And 3 or 4 days before Survivor Series, it came to Toronto. Really good card overall. Not everybody was on the Survivor Series. Amazingly enough, DiBiase was not in Survivor Series. He may have been too new to the organization, that they'd pre-booked who's going to wrestle who. These were all 5 or 10 people tag teams. So let's take a quick peek here. I'm going to go through the whole show. And unfortunately, they did televise probably 30% of Maple Leaf Gardens shows. Shockingly, this one was not televised. So the only evidence that I've seen that this show happened has been some still photos that someone was kind enough to share from ringside. I was way up in the green section, which, if you remember, the Gardens is right below the Grays. So the place was packed, sold out, 17,500. It was a matinee show. I was too young to go to the night shows at first, so every time there was a new show announced, the fingers would be crossed that it would be a matinee show. So here we are, 9 matches. It starts off, WWF Women's title had been kind of revitalized, and I think that a week later, the Survivor Series would really put a focus on some of these women. Sensational Sherry had previously beaten the Fabulous Moolah, ending what was supposedly a 26-year run. In reality, the women's title had been on and off and dormant for most of the previous 26 years, but they got Sherry in from AWA. She was a pretty big star there as a wrestler and a manager. So they said, let's do something with her. Let's get Moolah in here. Let's put the belt on Sherry, and let's immediately make her a heel and find her a rival who was a face. Of course, the half-sister of Jake the Snake Roberts, Rockin' Robin. So Sherry versus Robin opened the Toronto show. And Sherry won the match, kept the belt. And again, a few days later at Survivor Series, Sherry and 4 others would face Moolah and 4 others, including Rockin' Robin. And that Survivor Series would also introduce us to the phenomenal tag teams. Yeah, there were 2 women's tag teams. 2 veterans, Judy Martin, Leilani Kai, were put together. And I don't know where they won the belt, or if they invented the tag titles. And they were going to feud with these 2 small, acrobatic Japanese ladies, the Jumping Bomb Angels. So again, we're heading into Survivor Series. This show is setting that up. Of course, NWA was running Starrcade 87, and Vince was trying to do everything in his power to get people to not watch Starrcade. He even ultimatumed a lot of cable companies and said, if you show Starrcade instead of Survivor Series, you're not going to be able to show WrestleMania 4. So most of them went with Vince on this one. Starrcade 87 is another video I want to do, because that was really my first introduction to NWA. Moving on, Paul Roma and Jim Powers. They were on almost every Toronto card. I don't know what the deal seemed to be, but I would say 99% of Toronto shows at Maple Leaf Gardens between 85 and 95 had either one or both of the Young Stallions. I actually think Paul Roma was an amazing wrestler and was underutilized here, and it was nice to see him finally get a bit of a run later in his career with the WCW. Chance to hold the tag team titles with God, I can't remember. He had a couple different tag partners, Arn Anderson, Paul Orndorff. And then these two, get back to the show. So I had yet to witness on television the infamous Conquistadors. So these two costume guys come out fully covered in yellowish gold attire. Even their hands were covered in this, I don't know what it was, satin. So I immediately thought it was a tag team known as the Shadows, but no, this was actually the Conquistadors. So I had no idea who they were. They wrestled for probably 18 to 20 minutes, a really good tag match, and the Stallions won. And I guess the next day at school, who are these Conquistadors? Have they been on TV yet? Apparently they had, and I just missed them a few times. But yeah, Paul Roma, Jim Powers versus the Conquistadors. Good tag team match. Up next, Ron Bass against Koko B. Ware. Bit of a bizarre pairing because they weren't necessarily feuding. I'm trying to remember. I think Bass was in that Survivor Series, but I don't think Koko made that show. Anyway, Bass won the match with chicanery. The referee had been knocked unconscious. Bass, of course, came to the ring with this whip. So, of course, he choked out Koko and hit him with a whip. Then the referee finally wakes up and he gets the pin. So, not a clean win, but a win. But it kind of protects Koko, who's still fairly new in the organization, getting a bit of a push. Ooh, now we get one of the big ones. Probably one of the most memorable moments of the 1987 WWF was the Slammy Awards, which I guess at that time had yet to occur. Of course, the big angle started. Harley Race had just finished a feud with the Junkyard Dog. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was a fairly new character. He came and helped tag teams defeat Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. So at some point they decided let's get Duggan into his first feud. So Harley Race was on TV. He won a squash match. Instead of leaving the ring, he's hanging out there parading around, being a bit of an arrogant prick. So the next match is already about to start. Duggan and the Jobber come down to ringside. And of course, before Harley Race can get back to the dressing room, Duggan's already in the alleyway, rampway, walking down. Of course, they meet head to head. Both of them say, "You get out of my way." "No, you get out of my way." And of course, there's pushing and shoving. And of course, Duggan has a 2x4 and down goes Race. A week later, Race and Heenan would attack Duggan during an interview segment, so that set off this feud. And of course, Billy Red Lion says, "Don't you dare miss this one. Coming up at the Maple Leaf Gardens, you're going to see, finally, one-on-one in the ring, Duggan and Race." They actually main evented a lot of the B shows, including a B show I would see later on in the year in Halifax, Nova Scotia. But this being an A show, they're part of the mid-card. Still a good match. Is wrestling fake? Is it real? Is it kayfabe? It's kind of funny because I saw them wrestle twice within a month. They basically wrestled almost the exact same match. But what was different is the finish. Race beat Duggan in Toronto, and then a month later, Duggan beats Race in Nova Scotia. Physical brawl. Went back and forth, and the finish would usually be Race jumping off the top rope, going for either a high cross body, some sort of maneuver that ended up in a reverse roll-up. Of course, there was a Maple Leaf, not a Madison Square Garden match that made the Hacksaw Duggan videotape, where Duggan caught Race and did a complete roll around, which meant Duggan was on top for the pin, but somehow Race ended up getting the pin in this one. I'm sure there was a smash with the board after the match was over, so the fans got to be happy for something. Next, Junkyard Dog, still in the company, on the trending downward though. Guess what, Dog? You get to wrestle King Kong Bundy. Now, I just seen Bundy the previous month squashing CV Offie. And wow, that guy was huge. 6'6", 470 pounds. Seeing Bundy wrestle live was amazing. Now we're going to see him with slightly tougher competition. Junkyard, big star earlier on in the 80s down in the Mid-South territory. Had a pretty good push in 86. He was teaming with Hogan, doing the tag teams, the main events on the A shows. I believe he and Hogan wrestled either the Heenan family or the Funk Brothers in several main events. But Junkyard Dog trending down here would lose to Bundy. He tried to pick him up for the slam. Of course, they were very protective. Only Hulk Hogan could slam King Kong Bundy. So anyone else that tried to slam him, he would collapse on you. So Junkyard picks up Bundy, guts him up here, and then he just falls straight back. 1, 2, 3, match over. At least I can say I saw the Junkyard Dog, because he wouldn't last much longer after that. Bundy, his night was not over. We would see him again a little later. Now, here's an A card main event anywhere else in the world. 6-man tag, very hot. You had the Hart Foundation and Honky Tonk Man going against Randy Savage and the British Bulldogs. Of course, the Harts, who had the belts back then? Yeah. Defeated WWF, doesn't even say. The Harts and Bulldogs have been feuding, obviously, for over a year. And, yeah, the Harts had the belts then, because the Bulldogs dropped the belt because of so-called corrupt referee Danny Davis. Honky and Savage had been fighting over the Intercontinental. There was a Saturday night's main event where they come out with a guitar and smash Randy over the head. Elizabeth goes back for help and brings Hogan into the ring and forms the Mega Powers. But that's on hold because Survivor Series is going to be Hogan dealing with Andre. But the other, I guess the other singles Intercontinental contenders match in the Survivor Series was going to be Team Honky against Team Savage. One of the greatest Survivor Series matches of all time, in my opinion. So Savage was feuding with Honky. Savage also had issues with the Hart Foundation. The Bulldogs had issues with the Hart Foundation. So that made for a 6-man. And who won that match? I was just so excited to see these people live in person. I didn't even care who wins. I don't remember much of the match. According to this, the Faces won. And a couple months later, they'd all be back in Toronto. That's for another video, though. So Ted Dibiase finally comes to the ring. He's got his shot at the world title. He doesn't just have Virgil with him, though. He brings out King Kong Bundy. In many other cases, he would bring out Andre because he had formed a bond with Andre and eventually would supposedly pay Andre to fight Hogan so that he could get the belt off Hogan and then give it to him. But for now, most of these Hogan DiBiase matches would end with some sort of outside interference. So Bundy happened to be there. He's a Heenan family member. It made perfect sense. So Hogan comes out and he blows a gasket. Wham! Pandemonium. The yelling and the screaming is unlike anything else I think I've ever seen in my life. Hogan comes out, rips off his t-shirt, and it immediately starts with Virgil and DiBiase brawling. Hogan has to dispatch Virgil over the top rope. Bundy's there at ringside. He would try to interfere throughout the match. From what I remember, DiBiase was on offense for most of the match. With a lot of cheap shots, Virgil or Bundy would distract the referee, and then there would be a 2-on-1. And I don't even remember the Hulk up. That's how crazy this match was. At some point, Dibiase, back then, what was his finishing hold? He had the spinning toe hold, and he also would do the flying elbow off the second rope in a backwards motion. He didn't really have I guess what you would call a significantly strong finish, so at some point Hogan would have hulked up, because he does in every match. I can't even remember if it was a spinning toe hold kick out, or if Dibiase went for the elbow and missed. But yeah, Hogan hulked up, and then of course as soon as he starts attacking Dibiase, Virgil and Bundy get involved again. Somehow Virgil distracts the referee. Hogan is thrown out to the floor. Dibiase and Bundy are both beating up Hogan. Dibiase climbs back into the ring and continues to argue with the referee, and Bundy gets Hogan into the avalanche against the post on the outside. Wham! Down goes Hogan. Count-out victory. Dibiase wins the match, but not the title, which led to us all thinking there would be a rematch. Usually the way these things work is you have a foggy finish in the first show, so that the next show you can put some sort of stipulation in. All right, now we're going to have a new match. No count-out, no disqualification. Or if you get counted out, I still get to win the title. Or maybe there'll be a steel cage. Sometimes it would be a triple shot. You get 3 shows. I actually saw Orndorff and Rude in the third of 3 consecutive Maple Leaf Gardens shows. The so-called blow-off. No, I'm lying. I saw the second one. But interestingly, we never saw Dibiase versus Hogan one-on-one in Maple Leaf Gardens ever again. And a lot of those matches did not surface. If you go Googling, you'll find Hogan versus Dibiase in Houston, which happened literally within that same time frame. But yeah, there it is, my first show seeing Hulk Hogan. They went on last. Hogan usually went on mid-show because he wanted to beat the traffic. There would have been 2 intermissions in this show, but they saved the best for last. Bundy waited around to come back, and if that first show I'd seen earlier wasn't enough to convince me that this was really cool, this one certainly did. And like I said, there would be 9 more visits to see Hulk Hogan wrestle for me over the years. Probably 30 or 40 house shows in total. But yeah, there's my first Hulk Hogan memory at Maple Leaf Gardens. And anyone who got to go to the show, wrestling had finally caught on. It was big news, so everyone at school was jealous of the kids that got to go to the show. So I don't think I even bought any souvenirs. I definitely bought a program. I never actually got a Hulkamania t-shirt until later on in his career. Of course, the one behind me was purchased at WrestleMania 6 in 1990. I believe I also bought a Immortal Hulk Hogan shirt, probably in 90 or 91. I have no idea where that one is. Anyways, 23-minute video, extensively covering a very unique house show that was unfortunately lost because nobody recorded it. And oh well, you gotta just go with the memories. That was a long time ago, and I still have some memories of that show. And it's great that I can look at that Houston match and remember what Hogan versus Dibiase kind of looked like when I got to see him for the very first time. So I hope you enjoyed the video, folks. We'll be on again soon with some more. Have a great day.